We will begin in 1 minute. But before we begin, we want to say thank you to North Star Counseling Center, who is sponsoring this talk. You can reach them online at www.northstarcounselingcenter.com. Hello, everyone. Let me help them unmute. Perfect. Welcome, Lauren. Welcome, Leah. Thank you for joining us today. I think this is a great topic because it kind of piggybacks really well on the topic we just had at 10 o'clock today, which was, mental wellness deserts. And part of that conversation ended with how can we use our community? How can we use our neighborhoods? How can we, all join together to support each other? So really excited to have this talk with you all today. I appreciate you signing on and joining us. Before we begin, I am going to let everybody know who you are and give a little bit of information. And if anybody has any questions, you can put that in the little Q&A box up at the top, or you can put it in the chat box, and we will read those and answer those questions for you. So first we have Leah Hastings, CSW, who obtained her bachelor's degree in 2004 in criminal justice from Ball State University and went on to get her master's degree in social work from Indiana University in 2019. She spent 10 years working in the criminal justice system in Indiana and has been able to transition to the community-based services after obtaining her MSW. She is currently a clinical therapist with Mary Hurst in the Renewal Program. So welcome, Leah. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Lauren Muir, who, did I say your last name right? I apologize. I didn't ask you. Is it Muir?
No, you were right the first
Muir.
time.
Okay, just checking. Really should have checked on that beforehand. Sorry. Lauren is a licensed professional clinical counselor and a certified clinical trauma specialist for families. Lauren has over 10 years experience providing services in a variety of settings, including home and school-based services. Oh, goodness, my thing jumped. Sorry. Adults and jails. Organizations. And in addition, Lauren is a public speaker and a workshop facilitator on issues regarding mental health. So thank you very much, Lauren. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to talk a little bit more about how we as a community can support mental health and how we can use community as a tool. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. So I think the first thing that Lauren and I want to cover is kind of what is community? What does community look like? What is the definition of community? And what community means to us as individuals. Personally, when I hear community, I think of multi-levels. So I have a community within my family. It's a very small community, my husband and my immediate family, but then I have a community in my neighborhood with neighbors that I'm friends with. I have a community with my coworkers in the mental health field. I have a community within Louisville with activism within certain civil rights movements. And then we have the community of Kentucky, we have the community of America. So you can just continue to grow out into this community where it's almost a oneness and a wholeness, but you can break it down into smaller sections within that.
I completely agree. And community, I think it's so important because that's one of the things that we just need as humans is to stay connected to people, especially right now with the movement going on, with coronavirus going on. It's very important to tap into your communities and be able to, get that camaraderie and be around people that are like-minded and have your same values and beliefs to kind of give you some comfort and peace of mind.
Exactly. And that kind of rolls into like how do specific groups benefit from community? So if we're talking about the movement within Louisville, I know that there is this huge connection of people who weren't connected before, and we're benefiting spiritually and emotionally by having this connection with other human beings who feel as passionately as we do about things. So having a community of like-minded people benefits the community as a whole. So this small community is really impacting the community of Louisville and striving for change. And I think communities are how we make change, kind of progress into the future.
Definitely. And I know one community that's really important to Leah and I is the Therapist for Protesters Wellness. And I know you helped and were around when all of that got started. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Therapist for Protester Wellness was started by Millicent Cahoon, who is a therapist here in Louisville. And she reached out to just the therapist community as a whole to get people together to step up and say, like, people in the community are really hurting. Racial trauma is real. The things we experience every day, being at the square, being in marches, being face to face with, sometimes law enforcement who can seem hostile to you. It's important to have support. So she created this group where there are, 70 plus mental health professionals of all levels who come together and really help the community and just stand there and say, mental health is important. Taking care of yourself is important. So finding that community within the social justice movement, for me personally, has been really important, because now I not only have the community of people at the square, but I have the community of all these amazing human beings who I've met throughout the city that I have this connection to that I never knew before.
Yes, I completely agree. And that is something that's important that Lee and I were talking about. What does it look like to have communities that support you versus a community that doesn't support you? And I think what Leah just described is a perfect example of what it's like to have a community that supports you. So people that don't judge you, people that you can go to and be your total authentic self and be really honest with them, especially when it comes to such hot topics and sensitive topics as racial injustices and mental health. And so sometimes we find, especially in the mental health world, that there's this huge stigma behind mental health. And a lot of people feel like they don't have the community to talk about their issues, talk about their mental health diagnosis. And that's when people tend to, isolate themselves. They don't get better. They're reluctant to look out for help. And so we wanted to make sure that people recognize that there are communities in the city, whether it's in terms of racial things, the LGBTQ community, different spiritual or religious groups, even different ages. Make sure that you kind of find your tribe or your community that can understand and empathize through what you're going through.
I think you brought up a really good point, Lauren, in talking about finding a community that supports you. Because I think that personally, as I age, it's been a lot easier for me to identify what a community looks like when it supports me versus what a community may look like if it doesn't support me. So I think it's important to recognize that if a community doesn't support you, you're going to feel something physically, mentally, emotionally. We say you're going to feel some type of way. So if you are involved in the Catholic Church and that's your community and you feel deeply about that community, but you're also in the LGBTQ community and you feel as if your life is not valued, that community can be hurtful to you. And that can come in the form of fatigue and feeling drained and not really knowing why. It could come in the form of like physical pain. If you're holding tension in your body, if you're sitting certain ways, just being around people of that community, it can really be impactful to your overall physical well-being. So I think it's important for people to scan themselves when they're in a community. When I'm sitting in a meeting with the therapist that I have come to know and love, I feel relaxed. I feel happy. I feel like I'm laughing. And like, even though we're talking about heavy stuff, I feel really supported and really, really accepted. Whereas if I'm sitting in another meeting, am I feeling as positive? Is my body feeling as positive? And that's how I know whether that community can be for me or not. And I don't know if you have any experiences with how you know a community isn't for you.
Right. No, I think that's good. What it made me think of is also sometimes the community isn't something that we choose. It's almost, it's like like you said, like with religion, a lot of us, that's what our parents raised us as, and you're just kind of put into that community, so to speak. But then as you get older, you develop your own values and yourself, you recognize. So for me, it made me think of like anxiety. Like when you're getting worried about going around certain people, or you feel like you have to filter what you say around them and can't be your genuine, authentic self. I think that's a sign that, that community isn't your tribe. I love find your tribe. Like, I love that. Like, I love for everybody to find your tribe, because everyone deserves to feel like they can be themselves. And because when you're hiding, who you truly are, that definitely can have a huge impact on you. Like Leah said, not only mentally, but physically as well.
And I think that can also roll into communities, like you said, communities that you're born into, but also communities where the systems have forced you into them. So people of color being forced into certain parts of the city, gentrification, all of those things that really happen around us and we don't notice. We know that we go to church every day, and we know that, we are learning about God, things like that. But we don't necessarily learn at a young age that we're placed into these communities by a system and by a structure. And that we can often be impacted at birth by where we live, and by where our mothers lived, based on, the cortisol levels in mothers who give birth to children when they live in lower socioeconomic statuses and communities. So I think part of knowing your community is not only seeking who is your tribe and who makes you feel great about you, but also recognizing that the community that you're a part of could be a part of a system, which is, again, part of the reason that people are protesting, and part of the reason that Therapists for Protester Wellness stepped up to say, like, we need to help these people, because this is ongoing generational racial trauma that people are dealing with, on top of the everyday goings on in the city.
Yes. And I think that's a great segue into kind of a discussion around, so what do people do that live in these communities? And I know Leah and I both work in a lot of communities that are primarily people of color, and we're working to kind of debunk the stigma of mental health and break down the barriers of people having access to mental health and healthcare. So what can people in those communities do to support one another and to kind of create awareness of mental health and get access to healthcare and things?
So I would say that just sharing information is such a huge resource in these communities. We serve communities that do have the stigma of mental health. They're taught you don't talk to people outside the family about what's going on. But if you have a client that you're seeing and they have a neighbor that needs help, encouraging your client to say, like, hey, I see a mental health professional, maybe it would help for you. So just encouraging people in communities to speak out and say, my mental health is important, your mental health is important. And as part of an organization, making sure that you do everything you can in regards to outreach to reach those communities.
Yes, I agree. And I think for people to also not be afraid to have those conversations. I think a lot of times people tiptoe around, how people are feeling or issues that are going on. But, to have that conversation that, like, hey, it's okay if you're not okay. Like, there's people that can help. And Leah and I were talking about, there's so many resources in the city, but there's this barrier that people don't know that they do have access. Because there's several therapists in the city that do more of a homeschool community-based model that are going out into people's schools and their homes and meeting them in the community. So it's as simple as, being able to pick up the phone and call somebody at a local school to get connected, or at a local, like the neighborhood places, community centers. So that's something that we wanted people to know, that there are resources and there doesn't have to be all these hoops and hurdles to receiving mental health, as a lot of people expect.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, not to toot the horn of Therapists for Protester Wellness, but I work for Maryhurst. I work for an outpatient program. We go to schools, we go to homes. We don't force the client to come to us. We meet them where they are. We meet them however they need to be seen to make sure that they get the services they need. And when I say I work for Maryhurst, most people say, oh, you work with teenage girls. So I think it's important for like this networking, where we did get together and there are 70 people in a chat and I'm like, hey, I can take a client. We also have case management and CSA services. And they're like, oh, I thought you only had residential. And then Lauren gets to speak up and say, hey, we have case management also. And it's these amazing resources that even therapists didn't know about. So if we don't know about it as professionals, how do we get that message out there to the clients that we're trying to serve who need it the most?
Yes, that's a great point. That's a really great point. And so how do communities start to build? I know we touched on this a little bit. How do we start to remove the stigma of mental health in communities? And I think that through all of this, the past 6 months, or more at this point, I think. But I think that has been a positive of everything going on in the world around us, is I feel like mental health is on the spotlight. You know, people are talking, people are hosting things like virtual summits and Zoom calls. You've got therapists going out on their own, talking to people that normally wouldn't even be talking about mental health. I think Aaron's on the call. I saw him and some other therapists were doing something with like a radio talk show host or something like that. So I love that so many different people are starting to talk about mental health. And same, I think there's also been a big shift in mental health, which tells me that people are talking about it and that stigma is kind of going away, because I've seen a lot of clients personally that I normally don't see as far as different genders and socioeconomic status. A lot of males coming forward for therapy, saying that, okay, I'm ready to talk. And for me, that's been awesome to see.
Yeah. And I think that COVID has also played a big role. COVID started right before almost the civil unrest started. And so it was just this kind of flashbang of trauma in homes. So COVID started and people were on the news talking about, hey, kids are stuck at home and this is not good for them. And they may be struggling. Parents are stuck at home with kids and are trying to get them on the computer multiple times a day to do homework. And this may not be good for them. And like you, I've seen a large increase in people seeking out services in that they were trying to get help for their kids. And now they're like, hey, maybe I need someone to talk to too. So, we're seeing whole families now, which is not to say that a family is dysfunctional. It's to say that a family wants to be the best family that they can be. They want to interact the best way they know how, and they want to be the best individuals and community that they can be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And that comes up a lot when people are like, when should I get a therapist? And I think people think that you only get a therapist when something's going wrong in your life. But it's okay to have a therapist at any time, to just be able to have someone that can help you to navigate through, ups, downs, have somebody to talk to and process things with, validate how you feel. So there's a lot of people that do have therapists, ongoing or maintenance, not just because you're quote unquote crazy, So I think that's a good message to get out to people as well.
Yeah. And like, since we're talking about community, I think if you look at all of the communities in your life, they cause trauma. Like we use the word trauma and people think that you have to have been in Hurricane Katrina or, in some sort of natural disaster, or you had to have someone directly impacted by police brutality. Mm-hmm. Trauma is not being validated by your parents when you're growing up. Trauma is not fitting in at school and feeling like people don't care about you. Trauma is living in a community where you may not always feel safe, but you don't say the words, I'm unsafe. You just exist in a community where you're probably not as safe as you could be if you were in another community. So that's all trauma. So if you seek help at any time, if you're stable, if you're happy, if you're healthy, then your therapist knows your baseline. And when you're not feeling a-okay, your therapist is able to identify that. So I totally agree that like you can have a therapist at any time. There's not something wrong with you. And talking about spreading that information, I think just like Mental Health Lou, people like that have like t-shirts, bumper stickers, whatever, wearing a shirt that says decolonize mental health, Black mental health matters, shirts like that. And then people say, oh, what does decolonize mental health mean? Or
Right.
I never thought of mental health as being mostly a white thing, but it is. So Black mental health does matter.
Right. Yes, I love that. So speaking of, Mental Health Lou is an awesome organization that's promoting mental health and connecting therapists and getting resources out to the community. Are there other agencies that we can let people know about?
I know that Cardinal Success through U of L is doing great things and is very low cost. And is open to pretty much anyone. You don't just have to be a student. I don't want to toot on Maryhurst like I did on Therapists for Protest or Wellness, but I will. We accept clients with Medicaid, and it costs nothing. So you can see a therapist, you can have a case manager. If you're a child, you can have a CSA, a community support associate, and like you can have all these resources, and you don't have to be in active crisis. To say like, hey, I could use someone to talk to once a week.
Right. No, I agree. And same, to piggyback on that, or I am going to toot our own horn as well. But but we have Martin and Muir Counseling, which does therapy and case management. We also are with Have Hope Counseling, which has med providers, is able to do medication management for mental health. I know U of L Counseling Center. I've been doing a lot of stuff with U of L lately, and they have a great counseling center that's prepared to take on a lot of different types of cases and used to working with a lot of different situations. It also came up, Louisville Youth Group is a huge support system for the LGBTQ community. So although there's not therapists, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still in their own community and support network for each other.
Yeah, and I don't think that they have therapists, but I do believe that they have access to resources within the community of who would do gender affirming surgery and who prescribes hormones. Mental Health Lou said that LYG has youth groups. So they do. They have a trans night, and then like they may have a trans male and female night. I should have done more research, but it's just, and they have a clothes closet. So if you are, if you're female, but you don't have any female clothes at home, they let you go into the clothes closet and take things that you can wear that make you feel like your authentic self. And then I think also having compiled all these resources with Therapists for Protest or Wellness, people can reach out to us, and it is amazing how quickly we reach out to everyone in this group and we say, I have just talked to this woman. She is, middle-aged Black woman. She would prefer to see a Black therapist. These are the issues she's struggling with. Who would be best to see her? And someone will reach out and say, this is the exact population I work with. Please feel free to give her my information and have her contact me. If she doesn't feel comfortable with that, give me your information and I'll call her. So immediately people can reach out to us through our contact information and can get tied to a therapist that would be just absolutely the best for them, at least who we think is the best in the city.
Definitely. And if there's anyone, any of the attendees that are on the call that want to type in the chat box, other organizations or resources, then we can say those as well so everyone can hear when they're watching.
And then I'm going to put in the chat box the Therapist for Protest or Wellness contact information. There's always someone on call, and we have an email account as well. So if you know someone who's in need, or you need to connect with a certain type of therapist, you can send us an email or give us a phone call, and we can figure out who might be best and respond to that as well.
Awesome. So I think just to wrap things up, what have you learned about the power of community when it comes to mental health?
Personally, I just sitting at the square next to our banner and having people walk by and look and see the words mental health on a banner kind of takes them by surprise. But then it immediately gives them courage to talk to us because they see us in, Black Lives Matter gear with backpacks ready to march. So I think that I've learned that your community is never really who you think it's going to be until you find it. And when you find it, just 100% it's there and you know who they are.
Yes. That's a really good way to put it. And I agree. The therapist for Protesters Wellness Group has been really good to be a part of. And I've, been more behind the scenes than Leah has, but to see all the texts and seeing all the different types of people coming together to support mental health and support the community of Louisville as a whole has been very powerful. So I think that's the lesson to kind of like get out of it, is really look to find your community. And sometimes it's harder than others. And sometimes you do feel like you're alone, but even creating your own community, if you feel like you don't have the supports around you, find somebody in your school or your church or another organization that you do connect with, and that can become your community.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to shout out we didn't talk about this, but the churches that have stepped up through these protests where there were, some pretty scary nights between law enforcement and protesters who have said, you are welcome here. We will feed you. We have what you need. So just being aware of things like that in the city, if you don't have a group and you are religious and you want to find a spiritual connection with somewhere, find a new church, find one of these churches that stepped up to help people and keep people safe. Your space is out there. I found mine super quick when Millicent started this Therapist for Protester Wellness. And I mean, it's everything I didn't know I need, but here it is and I'm in it.
Right. So we have a couple of questions in the chat box. So one is, how can I get involved as a community member?
So the best thing to do as a community member, I would say that you can connect with us on our Facebook page, which is just Google or Facebook Therapist for Protester Wellness. I'll get it probably in the chat box before we're done, I think. Reach out to us and you can message us through there and just tell us who you are and what you'd like to do. You don't have to be a therapist to be involved. We have a lot of people on the back end working on just organization and helping farm out referrals, if you will, and making sure that they get to the right group. So checking the email, reaching out to people that they know would be responsive to accepting a new client, just anything like that. But Facebook would probably be the best way to connect with us. It's a private group, join it. And just say, I'd love to get involved. And Millicent will probably hop on and say, send me a message. And we'll go from there. That's actually how a lot of the group got involved.
Mm-hmm. The other question is, when talking to a friend and normalizing mental health, how do I do that? Do you have any tips or one-liners that can assist in normalizing mental health and fostering community? I think I can start on that if you want. I think that just being able to create a safe space for your friends to talk, in general, in conversation, validating how they feel goes a long way, even if you don't understand what they're going through. Saying, like, I understand that, I see you, like, I hear you. I'm sorry that you feel that way. And just continuing to talk and say, like, have you tried to reach out for, to therapists for protesters and get connected to a therapist? But listening, acknowledging, and providing like a non-judgmental safe space would be my suggestions for a friend.
Yeah, I agree. And just being honest about, hey, it seems like maybe you're not doing as good as you've always done. You don't seem like yourself today. Acknowledging that there may be something going on there. that they may need to be aware of. You know, sometimes we're feeling some type of way and we don't realize it. So saying, you don't seem like you yourself. Is there anything I can do to help? If they start to talk, you can say, like, is this something that you'd rather talk to somebody else about? I can help you find resources. Just straight up honesty. If you've been to see a therapist, I see a therapist and it really helps me. Just be honest about that and just help them. Like Lauren said, just guide them, be that safe place for them and help them find what they need. A lot of times if you give people the opportunity to talk, and just give them that space, then they'll come to you with what they need.
One, I typed in the chat box, but someone was asking us to repeat the name of the Facebook group. So it's Therapists for Protesters Wellness. And it's got, I'll put up my screen if I can. It's got...
I should be able to put it in the chat box. Give me a sec and
Awesome.
I'll copy and paste it in there. It's a private group, so you just have to request to get into it. And we have posts from other organizations throughout the Louisville community in there as well. And because this is Mental Health Awareness Month, we're sharing, oh, sorry guys, I shared it to the wrong people. We're sharing tips for how to care for your mental health, historical figures and how they cared for mental health, how our therapists care for their mental health, things like that.
And then last question so far, is there any specific social media accounts that you suggest to follow to create community online?
Go ahead.
I was going to say a couple of things. One, I'm not saying this just because it's my agency, but we have a really, really good social media person, and the content that's been on our social media has been awesome. So, and it's all geared around obviously mental health and the movement going on in the city, but there's some excellent articles on at Martin and Muir on Instagram, and then Martin and Muir Counseling on Facebook. But outside of that, and I'm just speaking for myself, I would, look for things that you're interested in. Like I find community in like the Therapists for Wellness group, but I'm also in one that's clinicians of color in Kentuckiana. So I have that support. I'm in another one that's Derby City Multiples because I have twins. So it's a group of twin moms. So maybe even putting out on your own social media, like, hey, looking for a group for moms of twins or whatever your situation is, and finding different circles that you can connect. And also Mental Health LOU, LOU, that's sponsoring this. That's also a great resource. I think would be a great place to start to find out about mental health and tips and other places to get engaged.
Yeah, I actually started following Mental Health LOU, and then, there are things that pop up when they're interacting that I start following as well. I added our Instagram in the chat, the Therapist for Protester Wellness. But I do a lot like Lauren does. And I just search in Facebook and in Instagram. I am part of the animal activist community in Louisville as well. So I when I first moved to Louisville, that's where I found like my tribe, my first tribe. So I just searched for like animal activism in Louisville, and there were a couple of organizations that came up, and I got involved in those, and, have met some really cool people that I was able to rely on in times when I didn't feel like I could rely on anyone else. Mm-hmm. So really just knowing who you are. Do you like art? Do you like nature? Do you like hiking? Louisville is such a diverse place that you can find a group willing to meet over just about anything.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay.
Do we have another question?
Yes.
I think do we have any more? Is there another one that popped up? Oh, there is. Go ahead.
I feel like I get anxious when meeting new people. Any tips?
I'm the same way. My face is red right now just because I'm talking on this and I can't see you guys. I don't even know. You guys could be like making faces at me and I can't see it. I'm like awkward. But I also will just say that. I'll come out and be like, I'm kind of awkward. And I feel like maybe it just makes me feel better, but it just kind of breaks like the tension. I always start with jokes. And then I always try and read people's energy. Like I can tell usually right away, like if I'm going to want to try and even engage with this person. But my tip would just be yourself, be who you are, be your genuine self. And people who are meant to be around you will still be around you.
Definitely. And know that everybody else, most likely, they're nervous too. Just like Leah said, we were texting each other before this. We're like, why are we nervous? We do this all the time. That's what we literally do for a living, is talk to people about mental health, but we're nervous too. So just also remember that the person sitting next to you probably has their own reservations and concerns as well. But definitely, be yourself, because I'm sure you're amazing, and that'll go a long way as well.
I love that. I think it's so true. I get nervous before these as well. Well, thank you both so much. I thought that was such a cool conversation. And obviously, like Leah said, Louisville is a really diverse city, and as far as like people's interests, there's a lot of different things to do. We're not a huge city, but we still have a lot of variety, which is really cool. And so there are lots of ways people can get involved, find their people, find people who are like-minded, and really make some change in their community or connect to people so that it helps them with their mental health. So very much appreciate this conversation. One thing before we go, well, a few things really. Either of you want to tell us, I know you talked a little bit about Therapists for Protesters Wellness. Anything additional you want to share? Any resources that you want us to throw on our webpage? We can do that. We can put the information you put in the chat box up there as well. Any upcoming talks or anything interesting that you want to share?
I don't have anything upcoming. I mean, we're Therapists for Protester Wellness are at pretty much every major event at the square. So stop by and say hi. We can give you our flyer to put on your website so that people know how to stay safe and things like that.
Great.
I think
Lauren?
I was going to say a couple. I'm like, now that you asked, so
Please.
That was something that came up in the Therapists for Protesters Wellness group that I thought was awesome. Spalding apparently is doing racial trauma groups, so that's a great one. U of L is doing support groups for faculty and students, and they're closed to strictly U of L students, but through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And then also another one I found out about today is Kentucky Derby Festival, which again would be an example of people, that might not typically talk about mental health. I believe starting end of the month or maybe November, they're doing WellCare Wellness Wednesdays. So they're going to have videos on mental health and interviewing different professionals and stuff every Wednesday. So that's something to look out for on their page.
That's awesome. Yeah, like you said, I think that's kind of the part of it too, is really like part of this talk is that you don't have to be a mental health professional. You don't have to be in the field to care about mental health or to make changes. And you also don't have to be an advocate out there like screaming it from the rooftops. You could just be a person who, supports people at your company, or somebody who, is mindful and compassionate, and that in itself is good. Or somebody who has a therapist and says, hey, I have a therapist, and just normalize it.
Yeah,
one person at a time. Smiling at someone at a grocery store could make the difference for them.
Yes, exactly. So we will have this conversation up on our YouTube page, and we'll have an audio version on the SanoMind app. Probably around the end of the week next week. And so I will send that info to you all. You can post this and share this. And anybody who's interested in looking at this or any of our other talks, you can go to our YouTube channel, and it's Mental Health Louisville. And you'll find pretty much all of the events so far are up, and we'll be adding more as we go. And stay tuned, because tonight at 6:00, we'll have one more talk, which is we're going to be talking about schemas and stigma and strength-based, well, we call it strength-based counseling, but going from a strengths-based angle, which is a topic called Black Girl Magic, Black Boy Choi. So please join us then, and otherwise have a fabulous day. Thank you, Lauren and Leah. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all the work you're doing for our community. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Thanks for what you're doing as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Same.